Well, that'd be a really big and difficult step because most of us in private practice get our salaries paid partly by Blue Cross, partly by Aetna, partly by United Healthcare, partly by patients themselves, partly by Medicare, partly by Medicaid. So we don't have anywhere close to a single payer system. Someplace like Hopkins will deal with almost 500 different insurance products. And frankly, our situation in academics is really not that much different. But there are a couple ways to do this. One is to take away the incentive to give the most expensive drug. As some people in both the insurance and oncology industries have said, it's not so much the cost of taking care of the patient during their last 2 or 3 years that's so expensive, it's the cost of the prescriptions and then monitoring the effect of that. We could change the incentives by doing bundled payments or episode payments. And there are a number of examples of this going on right now. So instead of getting paid to provide the most expensive drug I can so that I can make as much money as I can from my office to help offset other expenses, I would get paid a certain amount of money for doing someone's adjuvant chemotherapy for breast cancer. So 6 months of chemotherapy for breast cancer. And I would get paid so much either per month or per episode for providing a certain type of colorectal cancer metastatic disease therapy. US Oncology and some others have taken this a next step to make clinical pathways that really focus on providing the best care at the least expensive cost. So some of the lung cancer pathways, for instance, don't offer you 10 or 12 different drugs and 37 different combinations to use them. They offer generic paclitaxel and carboplatin with or without Avastin, which is the backbone of almost all the cooperative groups and almost all the good data for making people live longer and better with lung cancer. Both are generic, so in the typical private practice, they would be among the least well reimbursed and the least likely to help offset costs in the rest of the practice. But if they're getting paid a per member per month or a disease episode treatment for metastatic lung cancer, then that can reduce the incentive to use the most expensive drugs. And what they've found is that the overall survival of those patients on the pathway and off the pathway is exactly the same. Looking at the survival curve of patients on the pathway and off the pathway, they are superimposable. Absolutely no difference. But the cost of care is 35% less when you take away the incentives to give as much chemotherapy and the most expensive chemotherapy that you can. In colorectal cancer chemotherapy, the survival of patients on the pathway is actually slightly better, not worse, it's slightly better. And again, the cost is 35% less when you have patients treated on a best clinical practice pathway. Back to the point about how we could change the practice of oncology to better use expensive drugs. We know this works some, and we're familiar with it with hospital-based DRGs, diagnosis-related group payments. What we would essentially be doing would be creating DRGs for outpatient episodes of care and then piloting those in a substantial number of practices to ensure that it works, that people get the right sort of care, that people aren't being shortchanged, so that we don't swing too far on the other side. I don't think the presidential order gives the FDA any more power than it already has. What they could do is try publicizing the drug shortages so that we all know what's coming down the pike 3 months and 6 months from now. I'm afraid that that will just let some of the gray market people buy more of the drugs and take the prices even up higher. I think going after people who are price gouging would make very good sense. I'd like to see the FDA and CMS sit down and estimate the amount of drug we need for some of these drugs, particularly important for pediatric acute leukemia, estimate how much we need as a country, and then divvy it out among manufacturers at a price that will allow the company to make a profit, much like we do with vaccines.